Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a project manager, an entrepreneur, a strategic planner, or honestly, just someone who takes massive pride in your meticulous preparation, you are exactly in the right place today. We all absolutely love the feeling of a watertight plan, right? We love the spreadsheets, the contingency funds, those neat little checklists that tell us we're firmly in the driver's seat. But we also know the deep, lingering frustration of watching a project completely derail despite weeks or even months of that exact careful planning. So today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of analysis about what happens after the checklists are complete. We're talking about the residual unknown and how we can navigate the invisible risks that surround us literally every single day. Let's get into it.
So, can perfect planning eliminate risk? Wow, it's a comforting thought, isn't it? We operate under this assumption that if we just think hard enough, gather enough data, run enough simulations, we can engineer a flawless outcome where absolutely nothing goes wrong. But I want to challenge you today to question whether your most careful planning truly guarantees success, or if it just kind of gives you a false sense of security. Because as our source material reveals, the way real-world failures actually happen contradicts almost everything we tell ourselves during the planning phase. Let's dive into this by exploring the comforting trap we all fall into when we prepare for the future.
Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of control.
When we're deep in the planning zone, we naturally tend to tell ourselves things like, okay, I've covered everything, I've thought this through, and nothing significant can possibly go wrong. It's the psychology of planning at work, feeding the ego of the well-prepared mind. And it makes sense. We invest so much time and capital into our strategies that we desperately want to believe we're the absolute masters of our fate. But reality? Well, reality operates on a completely different premise. The stark truth is that planning reduces risk, sure, but it never ever eliminates it. There's this fundamental disconnect between our perception of control and the actual, chaotic mechanics of the real world. So, no matter how incredibly tight the plan is, a residual unknown always remains.
Moving right along to Section 2, the residual unknown.
Let's shift gears and dissect what actually causes our real-world plans to fall apart. When things go sideways, we usually look for some massive, obvious catastrophe to blame. But the data highlights something way more insidious. Disasters rarely come from giant, obvious dangers. Instead, failures actually originate from four very specific blind spots. First up, overlooked details. This isn't just forgetting to CC someone on an email. It's that minor software bug that gets pushed to the next sprint, which later cascades into a system-wide crash. Second, ignored warnings. Think of an early red flag raised in a routine meeting about a structural flaw, right? And it gets dismissed by leadership as mere pessimism, because, well, fixing it would delay the launch. Third, low probability events. We look at a 1% chance of a supply chain disruption and write it off as mathematically irrelevant, completely forgetting that a 1% chance still happens. And fourth, unquestioned assumptions. Actually, this is probably the deadliest one of the whole shebang. It's assuming your primary vendor will always have access to raw materials, or your target market is going to behave exactly as they did last year. These tiny, invisible threads of unquestioned logic, those are what ultimately unravel the whole tapestry.
Let's see how this builds in Section 3. 3 types of risk.
So the source breaks down risk into 3 distinct types to help us categorize the dangers hiding in our blind spots. The first category is known risks. Now, this is comfortable territory. It's where standard project management and preparation absolutely thrive. You're aware of these risks, and you actively plan for them. A perfect example would be budgeting for expected costs, or maybe building a buffer for a standard seasonal supply chain delay. Entire industries like commercial insurance and corporate quality assurance are built entirely around mitigating this specific, highly visible type of risk. It feels great because, hey, it's right there in front of us. But then we hit the second category, unknown risks. These are the sudden, invisible curveballs that catch even the smartest, most agile systems completely off guard. You didn't anticipate them, and therefore absolutely zero preparation exists for them in your plan. Our source points to things like sudden massive global supply chain freezes, unpredicted market shocks, or even sudden personal health crises within leadership. This is exactly where planning paralysis sets in, because an unknown risk fundamentally breaks your existing operational models. They just strike without any warning whatsoever. And that brings us to the third, and honestly the most fascinating category, ignored risks. You notice them, but you consciously dismiss them as minor or trivial. According to our analysis, this is often the most dangerous category of them all. Why? Well, because ignored risks stem directly from our own dismissive hubris. Picture a legacy business completely dismissing a brand new disruptive technology just because it currently has a tiny market share. The risk was entirely visible. The warning was loud and clear, but the decision makers consciously chose to look away because acknowledging it was inconvenient or just seemed too small to matter at the time.
And that brings us to this profound, deeper insight. Risk is what escapes your awareness. It isn't just about general uncertainty in the world. It is specifically about what we fail to see, or honestly, what we choose not to see. This perfectly explains why highly experienced professionals, incredibly well-prepared systems, and brilliant planners still face spectacular failures. You can absolutely be the smartest person in the room with the most robust strategy, but if your awareness has blind spots, the risk is going to find exactly those spots.
Okay, let's move to Section 4, Why Risk Always Persists.
So, you might be wondering, if we know all of this, why can't we just engineer a fix for it? Well, we have to address the unsolvable equation of why human intelligence can never bring risk down to absolute zero. The reason risk never truly disappears basically comes down to three fundamental truths about our universe and our own biology. First off, reality is endlessly complex. In today's highly interconnected global economy, a single regulatory change halfway across the world can disrupt your local project timelines within days. There are simply way too many moving parts for any single predictive model to capture. Second, we have to acknowledge that humans have strictly limited perception. Even with access to the absolute best big data and predictive analytics, human cognitive load has a ceiling. Our brains can only process a finite amount of information at any given time, leaving these massive, unavoidable gaps in our understanding. And third, the future is inherently uncertain. No amount of raw intelligence, processing power, or rigorous preparation can fully remove risk for the simple reason that the future hasn't been written yet. Absolute certainty isn't just difficult, it's literally a physical impossibility.
Our source material brilliantly captures this whole conceptual shift with a super powerful definition. It says, risk is the residual uncertainty that remains after all planning and preparation, the unseen, underestimated, or ignored factors that can still influence outcomes. I love this because it entirely reframes how we should view our jobs as leaders and planners. We've got to step away from the illusion of absolute control. Risk isn't just some simple math problem you can neatly solve at a whiteboard. It's the leftover, unpredictable residue of reality that you simply have to manage, day in and day out.
Let's pivot to practical solutions in Section 5, Navigating the Unknown.
So how do we actually operate practically in a world defined by these hidden gaps? The crucial point here is adopting a continuous four-step process for building resilience against the unexpected. Step 1, stay humble. You must actively accept right now that you don't and literally can't know everything. That mindset shift alone prevents catastrophic overconfidence. Step 2, build buffers. You need substantial margins in your planning. We're talking financial margins to absorb unexpected costs, strategic margins to allow for sudden pivots, and yes, even emotional margins for your team to handle the stress of the unknown without burning out. Step 3, prepare for surprises by prioritizing flexibility over perfect plans. Out in the real world, the team that can fluidly adapt to a market shock is absolutely going to outperform the team desperately clinging to an obsolete checklist. And finally, step 4, pay attention to small signals. Remember those ignored risks we just talked about? Minor issues almost always precede major failures. Keep your eyes wide open to the trivial anomalies because that is exactly where the residual unknown begins to show its face. To put all that into practice, our source offers a really powerful new mental model. I have planned well, but I expect something unexpected. Man, that is the perfect balancing act for any professional. Adopting this doesn't mean you just throw your hands up and stop planning. You still plan rigorously. But holding this mindset prevents overconfidence. It dramatically improves your adaptability on the fly, and it keeps you incredibly alert without turning you into someone who's constantly paranoid. It is the absolute sweet spot between confident preparation and adaptable survival skills.
To summarize the core philosophy of this entire explainer, risk isn't the part of the project you can easily see and prepare for. It's the exact part that remains completely invisible until the very moment it becomes real. Therefore, true mastery and true wisdom as a strategic thinker is not about eliminating risk completely, because again, no way, that's impossible. It's about actively respecting risk's presence, especially in those really quiet moments when everything looks completely under control.
I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on today. Take a quick look at your current projects, your business strategies, or even just your broader life plans. Everything probably looks pretty fantastic on paper, right? The cells are green, the budget is approved, the timeline is totally set. But ask yourself, are you ignoring a small, invisible signal right now? Is there a foundational assumption you haven't bothered to question? Or maybe a minor warning from a team member that you brushed off as trivial? Because remember, the greatest threat to your success isn't what's mapped out perfectly on your spreadsheet. It is precisely what has escaped your awareness. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, stay alert out there.